There are places in the world where fear isn't just a passing feeling. It's a constant presence, something that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. Thornhill was one of those places. For 12 years, the small village of Thornhill, nestled between pine-covered hills in rural Pennsylvania, lived under the terror of something nobody could fully name. They called it the creature. Others preferred the monster in the woods. But everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever it wasn't human. It all started in October 2013. First, it was the animals. Tom Henderson's cattle appeared mutilated in the pasture, their entrails scattered as if something wild and furious had feasted there. Then the Crane family's chickens disappeared overnight, leaving only blood-stained feathers and strange marks in the dirt. Marks that looked like human footprints, but larger, deeper. The children started having nightmares. 7-year-old Emily Warren woke up every night screaming that she'd seen a face with no face staring through her bedroom window. The Morrison boy swore he'd heard howls that weren't from wolves or coyotes, something that made his soul tremble. Soon, it wasn't just animals. Fence gates were ripped from their hinges, barn windows shattered. And then one foggy night, the Methodist chapel at the forest's edge was found with its doors marked by deep scratches, as if invisible claws had tried to force entry. But what scared everyone most was the sound Mrs. Peterson, who lived next door, swore she'd heard that night. A human moan, low and prolonged, filled with unbearable pain. Thornhill's police force consisted of only 3 officers. Sheriff Davies did his best. He organized patrols, set up traps, even called in wildlife experts from Pittsburgh. But every time they found a trail, it mysteriously disappeared at the tree line, as if the forest swallowed any evidence. So the townspeople took matters into their own hands. Armed groups began making nightly rounds, flashlights cutting through the darkness, rifles loaded. But the creature was smarter than them. It attacked when they least expected it, always in different places, always disappearing before anyone could see it clearly. There were conflicting reports. Some said they'd seen a tall, hunched figure. Others spoke of something that moved on all 4s. One man swore he saw eyes shining through a tattered mask. As the years passed, fear transformed into something darker, hatred. The people of Thornhill began talking about the monster as if it were a curse, pure evil that needed to be exterminated. "When I catch that thing," Tom Henderson would say through gritted teeth, "I'm gonna end it, slowly." It was in this climate of fear and rage that Grace Holloway arrived in Thornhill in September 2025. Grace was 58 years old and had been blind since she was 23, when an untreated infection stole her vision. But those who knew her would say she saw better than most. She had that kind of serene presence that made people feel seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in their lives. Her hands were soft but firm, and her voice carried a gentleness that disarmed even the hardest hearts. Grace moved into the small wooden house on Maple Street, inherited from a distant aunt who'd passed away. The house sat just 200 yards from the forest's edge. "You can't live here, dear," said Martha Klein, her next-door neighbor, on the first day. Martha was a sturdy 65-year-old woman who immediately took Grace under her wing. "Especially you, being, well, with your condition. That thing in the forest won't have mercy." Grace just smiled, her hands skillfully organizing the moving boxes. "Martha, every creature of God deserves compassion, even those we don't understand." Martha looked at her as if she'd said the moon was made of cheese. "Grace, that's not a creature of God. It's a demon. It's killed our animals, scared our children, for 12 years. But Grace didn't change her mind. She arranged her house with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate the world without sight. Every object had its place. She installed her spice shelves in the kitchen, hung her lace curtains in the windows, and placed her Braille Bible on the bedside table. Weeks passed. Grace attended the small Baptist church on Sundays, where her soft voice rose in hymns with a devotion that moved those present. She baked apple pies for the neighbors and always had a kind word for anyone who knocked on her door. But at night, when Thornhill plunged into the tense silence that had become its trademark, Grace would sit on the back porch, a cup of tea in her hands, listening in a way that only the blind can listen, with her whole body, with her whole soul. And it was on one of those nights, exactly 3 weeks after her arrival, that Grace heard something that made her heart stop. It was a sound coming from the forest. Not a howl, not a roar. It was crying. A low, broken sob, filled with an anguish so deep it seemed to tear the night in half. It was the sound of someone completely broken, completely alone, completely without hope. Grace set down her teacup on the side table. Her hands didn't tremble when she stood up. She went into the kitchen and, with precise movements, filled a large glass with cold water from the refrigerator. Then she grabbed her white cane that was propped by the door. Martha Klein was on the other side of the fence putting away her gardening tools. She saw Grace descending the steps of the back porch, walking toward the tree line. "Grace? Grace, what are you doing?" Martha's voice went up an octave. "Grace!" But Grace kept walking, her cane tapping the ground in a steady rhythm, the glass of water in her other hand. Lights began turning on in the surrounding houses. People came out onto their porches. Tom Henderson grabbed his shotgun. Sheriff Davies, who was making his nightly rounds, hit the gas pedal. "Come back, Grace," someone shouted. "That thing will kill you." But Grace didn't stop. She reached the forest's edge, where the streetlight ended and complete darkness began. For a moment she hesitated, just for a moment. Then she took another step, and disappeared into the darkness. The forest swallowed Grace completely. Behind her she could hear the neighbors' screams, but they seemed distant now, muffled by the dense trees. Her feet stepped on wet leaves and dry branches. Her cane touched tree trunks, helping her navigate. The crying had stopped when she entered the forest, but Grace continued in the same direction, guided by something she couldn't name. Faith, perhaps, or simply the absolute certainty that whoever was out there needed help, not more violence. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, non-threatening. "I didn't come to hurt you. I brought water. Are you thirsty?" Silence. Just the wind in the pines. Grace took a few more steps. "I know you're there. I heard you crying. It's okay to cry. We all cry sometimes." A sound. Quick movement in the bushes to her left. Grace turned her head in that direction, though she couldn't see anything. "My name is Grace. Grace Holloway. I just moved into the house on Maple Street. The blue one with the white porch. You must have passed by there a few times." Heavy breathing. Close. Very close. Grace extended the glass of water forward. "It's warm tonight, even for October. This water is ice cold. Please take it." For a long moment nothing happened. Then Grace heard the sound of breaking branches. Slow, dragging footsteps. Labored breathing like someone in constant pain. And then a smell. Strong. Pungent. Not just dirt or forest mold. It was the smell of long ago burned flesh. Of poorly healed wounds. Of years living without proper bathing. A hand touched hers. Grace had to make a conscious effort not to pull back. The hand was rough, covered in scars she could feel. The fingers trembled. Slowly, very slowly, the hand took the glass. Grace heard the sound of someone drinking desperately. Water running down the chin, swallowing in large gulps. The glass was emptied in seconds. "More?" Grace asked gently. A sound. Not exactly a word, but an attempt. A voice that had long ago stopped forming human language. Mo. "Yes, more. I'll get more for you. But you need to come with me. I can't walk through this forest alone at night. Can you help me?" Behind her at the forest's edge, Grace could hear the growing commotion. Sheriff Davies was shouting orders. Someone brought spotlights. Tom Henderson and his friends were loading their weapons, preparing to enter. "Please," Grace whispered, just for the figure in front of her. "Trust me. I won't let anyone hurt you." There was a moment of silence so profound Grace thought she'd lost him. Then a hand, large, rough, trembling, gently held her elbow, guiding her. Together they began walking back. When Grace emerged from the tree line, there was a collective gasp of relief that quickly transformed into horror. Because behind her, half hidden in shadows but illuminated by the spotlights, was the monster of Thornhill. He was tall, very tall, maybe 6'5", but he was hunched over, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wore tattered rags that had once been clothes. His feet were barefoot, dirty, bleeding, and his face. Martha Klein brought her hand to her mouth, stifling a scream. The man's face was a mass of scar tissue. Old burns had transformed his skin into something that barely looked human. One side of the face was worse than the other. The ear completely melted. His eyes, though, his eyes were human, frightened, desperate, filled with a shame so deep it hurt to look. "Don't shoot," Grace said calmly, her voice cutting through the silence. "He's not a monster. He's a man, and he needs help. Grace, get away from him now." Sheriff Davies had his weapon pointed, but his hands were shaking. 12 years. 12 years hunting this thing. "No," Grace said simply. "You'll have to shoot me first." The man beside her made an anguished sound. He tried to back away, but Grace held his arm with surprising strength. "Stay," she whispered. "I promised I wouldn't let anyone hurt you." Tom Henderson stepped forward, his face red with anger. "That thing killed my cattle, destroyed my property, scared our children for 12 years. The man beside Grace began making strange, desperate sounds. His breathing accelerated. He was having a panic attack. Grace turned to him, though she couldn't see him. Her hands found his destroyed face, and she held it with infinite gentleness. "Breathe. It's okay. You're safe with me." "Grace, you don't understand," Martha said, tears streaming down her face. "This creature has terrorized us. We can't just—" "Then tell me," Grace said, still holding the man's face. "Tell me what he did. Every time. In detail." And they told her. Every incident, every dead animal, every destroyed property, every scare in the night. 12 years of terror poured out in collective catharsis. Grace listened to everything, and then she asked a simple question. Was anyone physically hurt? Any person? Silence. "No one," Sheriff Davies finally admitted. "Just animals and property." But you hunted him," Grace said softly. "For 12 years. With guns, with traps, with hatred." The man beside her collapsed, literally collapsed to the ground, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Grace knelt beside him, her hands finding his back, offering comfort. And then she said something that would change Thornhill forever. "He wasn't attacking you. He was asking for help, the only way he knew how." Grace brought the man into her house that night, ignoring the protests and threats. Sheriff Davies insisted on staying outside, just as a precaution. Tom Henderson and his friends mounted unofficial guard, their weapons ready. But inside the small blue house on Maple Street, something extraordinary was happening. Grace prepared a bath. She heated water on the stove, filled the old-fashioned bathtub, added gentle soap and lavender. "It's going to hurt," she said gently. "Your wounds will sting, but you need to be clean." She guided him to the bathroom, gave him privacy. For an hour, she heard sounds of water, muffled sobs, and occasionally a groan of pain when soap touched open wounds. When he finally emerged, wrapped in a large towel, Grace had prepared the table with food. Not a feast, but something simple and nutritious. Chicken soup, homemade bread, fresh water. "Eat slowly," she warned. "Your stomach isn't used to real food." He ate like a starving man, but trying to control himself. Grace could hear every bite, every difficult swallow, as if he'd forgotten how to eat civilly. "What's your name?" she asked after a while. Silence. Then a hoarse voice, almost unrecognizable as human after years without use. Daniel Cooper." Grace smiled. Daniel. A good name. A prophet's name. In the following weeks, Grace did what no one in Thornhill thought possible. She brought Daniel back to humanity. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. And there were moments when she questioned her own sanity. Daniel couldn't sleep inside the house at first. The first night, Grace found him curled up in the corner of the back porch, shivering, his wide eyes staring at the forest like a trapped animal. "It's okay," she whispered. "We can go slow." She brought blankets, made a safe space for him there on the porch. Slowly, over days, he moved closer to the door. Then one day he slept on the other side of the door, still not confident enough to fully enter. Martha Klein came every day, bringing food, old clothes from her late husband. She kept her distance from Daniel, but her curiosity was clearly winning over her fear. "You're crazy, Grace Holloway," she'd say, but always left an extra plate of cookies. It was Martha who finally got Daniel to talk more. One afternoon, she found him in the backyard, carefully fixing Grace's broken fence. "You know how to do that?" she asked, surprised. Daniel froze, then nodded slowly. "Did you do this before? Before the fire?" Another nod. Then, after a long moment, Carpenter. I was a carpenter." The truth began coming out in fragments. On long nights when Grace sat on the porch with Daniel, both wrapped in blankets, as he finally told his story. Daniel Cooper was 35 years old when the fire happened. He was in a psychiatric hospital in Philadelphia, admitted for treatment of severe depression after his wife's suicide. It was October 2013. An electrical failure caused a massive fire on the 4th floor. Daniel was there. I tried to help." His voice broke. "There was a nurse, trapped. I went back, got her. But the ceiling fell." The burns Daniel suffered covered 40% of his body, mainly his face and torso. In the confusion of the evacuation, with dozens of patients and staff being taken to multiple hospitals, Daniel simply disappeared. Traumatized, disfigured, mentally broken, he fled before anyone noticed. I couldn't let people see me, what I'd become. He walked, for days, stole clothes from clotheslines, ate from dumpsters, and eventually he found Thornhill's forest. There he built a primitive shelter in a hidden cave, and there he lived. For 12 years. "The animals," Grace said softly. "Why did you kill them?" "Hunger," Daniel said simply. "At first, I didn't know how to hunt right. Made a mess. Scared them. Later I learned better. And the properties? The destroyed doors?" Daniel lowered his head, shame evident in every line of his body. "I wanted to go in, wanted to be part of something again, but when I got close, saw lights, heard families, I remembered what I was, what I'd lost, and I got angry. Angry at God, angry at myself." "The church," Grace said, remembering the night the doors were scratched. "You went to the church." "I wanted to pray," Daniel whispered. "Wanted to ask God, why he left me alive like this, why he took my wife, why he made me a monster. But the doors were locked. I lost control." Grace reached out, found his hand. "You're not a monster, Daniel. You're a child of God who was lost, and God never stops looking for his lost children." But the true dark night of the soul was still to come. It was when Sheriff Davies showed up with news. They'd confirmed Daniel's identity through old records, and there was a problem. "The nurse's family," the sheriff said, his face serious. "The one who died in the fire. They found out you're here. They're coming." Daniel collapsed, literally couldn't breathe. "She died because of me. I went back, but I wasn't fast enough." "You tried to save her," Grace said firmly. "But she died," Daniel shouted, the first time he'd raised his voice. "She had kids, a husband, and she died because I wasn't fast enough." He ran back to the forest, and for the first time since she'd brought him home, Grace couldn't follow him. She stood there on her porch, hearing the distant sobs coming from the trees, and for the first time, she questioned whether she'd done the right thing, questioned whether Daniel could ever truly be redeemed in Thornhill's eyes, questioned whether she had any right to bring back a man who didn't want to be found. Martha came to sit beside her. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "How do you know?" Grace asked, tears finally falling. "Because," Martha said, "for the first time in 12 years, I'm not afraid." The nurse's family arrived 3 days later. Robert Mitchell, the widower, and his 2 children, now adults, James 30 and Sarah 27. They came prepared with lawyers, with 12 years of accumulated anger, and with the intention of finally making Daniel Cooper pay for his negligence. The meeting was scheduled at the Baptist Church, neutral territory, with Pastor Johnson mediating. Grace spent 2 days trying to convince Daniel to come back from the forest. He refused. "I can't," he said. "I can't face them." "So you're going to spend the rest of your life running?" Grace asked, her voice harder than usual. "You want to honor Sarah Mitchell's memory? Then show up. Tell the truth. Let them decide." On the morning of the meeting, Daniel finally emerged from the forest, but he didn't go straight to the church. He went first to Thornhill's small cemetery. Grace was waiting for him there, somehow knowing where he'd go. Together, they walked between the headstones until Grace stopped. "It's here," she said. Daniel looked at the headstone. Sarah Mitchell, beloved wife and mother, 1975-2013. He fell to his knees. And there, for the first time in 12 years, Daniel Cooper prayed. Not with anger, not with accusation, but with surrender. "God," he whispered, "I don't deserve forgiveness. Not from them, not from you, but I need them to know the truth. Need them to know she wasn't forgotten, that her death wasn't in vain. Please, please give me strength." Grace placed her hand on his shoulder. "He already has, Daniel. You just need to accept it." The church was packed when they arrived. Not just the Mitchell family, but half of Thornhill. Everyone wanted to see the monster finally confronted. Daniel entered and absolute silence fell over the congregation. He kept his head down but didn't flee. Grace held his hand firmly as they walked down the aisle. Robert Mitchell was at the front, flanked by his children. His face was a mask of pain and contained rage. Pastor Johnson began. "We're here to—" "I killed your wife," Daniel interrupted. His voice was clear, stronger than Grace had ever heard. "Not directly, but she died because of me. And I need you to know. I need you to know everything." And then Daniel told them. He told them about that October night in 2013. Told them about the fire alarm sounding, about the smoke filling the hallways, about how everyone was evacuating. "I was on the stairs when I heard her," Daniel said. "Sarah, she was screaming. A patient had panicked, locked her in one of the rooms. The key was on the inside." He looked directly at Robert Mitchell, his scarred eyes filled with tears. "I went back. I could have gotten out, but I heard her calling for help. And I went back." "You went back," James Mitchell said, his voice hard. "And then? I tried to break down the door. Couldn't. So I went through the interior window. Cut my arms on the broken glass. The smoke was so thick I could barely breathe." Sarah Mitchell, the daughter, was crying silently. "I found your mother," Daniel continued. "The patient was unconscious on the floor. I dragged him to the hallway first, and then I went back for her. But she died," Robert said, his voice breaking. "The ceiling collapsed when I was carrying her," Daniel said. "A beam fell, hit her, hit my face, my chest. I tried to lift it, but it was too heavy. And she told me to go, told me her children needed to know she loved them, made me promise I'd tell you." He pulled something from his pocket, a small crucifix on a burned and twisted chain. "She was wearing this. I kept it, all these years. It was all I had to remember that once. Once I tried to do something good." Robert Mitchell took the crucifix with trembling hands. It was the same one he'd given Sarah on their 10th wedding anniversary. "You saved the patient," Sarah Mitchell suddenly said. "The first person. You saved him." Daniel nodded. "A 19-year-old man. Michael Chang. He survived. Lives in Boston now. He's a psychologist. Works with trauma victims." James Mitchell stepped forward. "And then you ran. Disappeared. Left us without answers for 12 years. "Yes," Daniel said simply. "Because I'm a coward. Because I looked in the mirror and saw a monster. Because I didn't have the courage to face you. Because it was easier to hide in the forest and be the creature I thought I deserved to be." "But you're not a monster," Grace said, her voice cutting through the silence. "A monster wouldn't have gone back to try to save Sarah. A monster wouldn't have carried that guilt for 12 years. A monster wouldn't be here now exposing his wounds to you." Robert Mitchell was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. He approached Daniel slowly. For a long moment the two men stood face to face, one carrying 12 years of loss, the other 12 years of guilt. "You tried to save her," Robert finally said. "But I failed," Daniel responded. "You tried," Robert repeated. And then, in an act that left everyone in the church breathless, he extended his hand. Daniel looked at the extended hand as if it were the most precious and terrifying thing he'd ever seen. Slowly, trembling, he took it, and Robert Mitchell embraced the man who had tried to save his wife. 6 months passed since that day at Thornhill Baptist Church. Daniel Cooper didn't return to the forest. With Grace's help, Martha's, and surprisingly, the Mitchell family's, he began the long process of rebuilding his life. The first step was medical. Robert Mitchell, who worked for a major insurance company, used his connections to get Daniel treatment. Reconstructive surgeries, therapy for trauma, medication for the depression he'd ignored for over a decade. It wasn't easy, and the scars, both physical and emotional, would never completely disappear, but he was trying. The second step was legal. Sheriff Davies, after investigating extensively, concluded Daniel hadn't committed any crime deserving prosecution. His attacks on property were reclassified as survival necessities of a person in extreme psychological distress. The Mitchell family publicly forgave any transgression. The third step was spiritual. Daniel began attending church. At first he sat in the back, hood covering his face. But over time the hood came down. Pastor Johnson baptized him in April, in a ceremony that left half the congregation in tears. But the real transformation happened in the domino effect that Daniel's story caused in Thornhill. Tom Henderson, who'd spent 12 years hunting the monster, sought out Daniel personally. "I was going to kill you," he admitted. "I had so much hatred. But watching you face the Mitchell family, made me realize the monster I was becoming." Tom now leads a support group at the church for men dealing with anger. Martha Klein transformed her fear into mission. She founded a community outreach program for homeless people, especially those with mental health issues. "Daniel spent 12 years 200 yards from my house," she says, "and I never saw the real person. How many other people are invisible right in front of us?" The Mitchell family established the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, offering scholarships for nurses working in mental health. James and Daniel now work together on the project, sharing Sarah's story and how her compassion, even in her final moments, continues to save lives. And Daniel? Daniel returned to carpentry. He built a new porch for Grace, fixed Martha's fence gate. He's slowly rebuilding the small chapel he once marked with desperate scratches of a man searching for God in the darkness. Grace Holloway still lives in her small blue house on Maple Street. She still sits on her porch at night listening. But now, instead of crying from the forest, she hears the sound of Daniel working in his shed, wood being cut and sanded, transformed into something new. "Why did you do it?" someone asked her recently. "Why did you risk everything for a stranger?" Grace smiled, her hands holding her teacup. "Because Jesus didn't ask if the man by the roadside deserved help. He just stopped and offered water. There are places in the world where fear is defeated, not with guns, not with hatred, but with a glass of cold water offered in the darkness, and the radical courage to see humanity where everyone else sees monsters. Thornhill is one of those places now. And maybe, just maybe, the question isn't whether Daniel deserved Grace's compassion. The question is, who in your life is invisible because you've already decided what they are instead of seeing who they could become? When was the last time you offered a cup of cold water to someone the world has labeled a monster? If this story reminded you that God's love sees beyond what our eyes can see, leave your amen in the comments below. Share this with someone who needs to remember that redemption is always possible, and subscribe for more stories of faith that change hearts.